Welcome, dear readers. You are listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast book club. We are recording today from the Louis Riel Library in Winnipeg, which is within Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ininew, and Dakota peoples, and in the National Homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. In this episode, we will be discussing The Apollo Murders by Chris Hadfield. I'm Toby, an outreach librarian based out of Millennium Library, and now that I've read this book, I'm pretty confident in my ability to fly a jet, spaceship, helicopter, and submarine, as well as operate the weapon on a Soviet space station and fire a Soviet-issue gun while on the moon. And across the table from me is...
Hi, I'm Trevor, and I work here at the Louis Riel Library, and Houston, we have a problem with the pacing, the plot, and the characters.
A good book can carry me away from an average and ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And you, dear readers, we wouldn't do this without you. We'd love to hear from you. You can find our email address and all our social media outlets by going to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca and scrolling to the bottom of the page. Hang around until the end of the episode to enjoy our favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. Before we dig in, let's do a quick check-in with the panel and address the elephant in the room. I am not Dennis.
Or the elephant not in the room.
Yes.
Although I would never call Dennis an elephant. Except unless you like elephants.
I do really like elephants.
I like elephants too, and I like Dennis. And you're right, he isn't here. And not only will we not hear his the dulcet tones of his baritone voice, we also do not have his editing this month, which I am going to attempt. So hopefully, this will just appear like another episode. It seems like our transfer over to Transistor worked well. And in fact, if you just look up our regular website, wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca, you'll be taken right to all of our episodes, right from episode 1. And that seemed to go okay. There might have been a few little weird things in the show notes, but all the episodes are there, which is the main thing. And we look forward to having Dennis back when he is back.
Yes, which he will be back for the next episode.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Unless we leave him on the moon.
No.
Well, we shouldn't say where he's at. He's on the moon.
Yes. Dennis is on the moon. All right. I'm going to tell us about the author, after which Trevor will give a summary of the book. So Chris Hadfield, he was born August 29th, 1959 in Sarnia, Ontario. As a child, he saw the Apollo 11 moon landing on television, which sparked an interest in space. His dad was a pilot, and Hadfield and his brothers were members of the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. After high school, he joined the Canadian Armed Forces and spent 2 years at Royal Roads Military College and 2 years at the Royal Military College, where he received a B.Eng in Mechanical Engineering in 1982. He was a tactical fighter pilot with the Canadian Armed Forces and attended the United States Air Force Test Pilot School in California to Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. In 1992, he received a MS in Aviation Systems from the University of Tennessee Space Institute. That same year, he was selected to become one of 4 new Canadian astronauts in a field of over 5,000 applicants. Hadfield and Mark Garneau were assigned to NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston to train as mission specialists, which are astronauts who operate shuttle systems and perform spacewalks. In 1995, he took his first trip to space, a mission to transfer supplies to the Russian space station. During this trip, he became the first Canadian to operate the Canadarm and the first Canadian to walk in space. His second trip to space was in 2001, where he was to deliver and install the Canadarm2. From 2001 to 2003, he was the Director of Operations for NASA at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia. He resigned from the Canadian Air Force in 2003, becoming a civilian astronaut at the Johnson Space Center from 2003 to 2008. In 2010, NASA announced that he would become the first Canadian commander of the International Space Station. He spent 6 months on the ISS from 2012 to 13. During his free time aboard the space station, he recorded music for an album and made a video of himself singing David Bowie's Space Oddity, which got over 50 million views on YouTube. Space Sessions, Songs from a Tin Can was released in 2015, the first album to be recorded off-planet. He's done a bunch of other stuff, including creating and hosting TV shows. He's written several books, including an autobiography, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, which was a New York Times bestseller, and the novels The Apollo Murders and its sequel, The Defector. He's received the Order of Canada. He's an advisor to SpaceX and Virgin Galactic, and is an adjunct professor at the University of Waterloo. He's married to his high school girlfriend, Helene, with whom he has 3 children, Kyle, Evan, and Kristen.
Yeah, national treasure.
He's done a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if politics is going to be next for him.
Yeah, well, that sometimes is a career path for former astronauts. Mark Garneau. And
Julie Payette, which didn't really work out.
That one, John Glenn in the States. He was a senator, I think.
There you go.
Yeah, so
people like astronauts.
People like them. They're trustworthy. They are competent. Often good-looking.
I do not approve of Hadfield's mustache. FYI, I know.
I think it's a military thing.
Really?
I don't know. I think so. I think maybe.
Can they not have beards?
I don't know. Like the New York Yankees. New York Yankees don't allow beards.
Oh.
That's something maybe we can look up later. That's a good question. So anyway, yes, the synopsis of Chris Hadfield's first novel, which is The Apollo Murders. I think this genre we would call, I don't know what we would call it, spy-fi? Anyway, it's an alternate timeline to what our real one is. So NASA is getting ready to prep its final Apollo mission, Apollo 18. And in reality, there were 17 Apollo missions. So they're getting ready to do Apollo 18 when the CIA discovers that not only have the Soviets launched a space station for the purposes of spying, they have also successfully landed a rover on the moon. The year is 1973. The mission objectives are abruptly modified to include a rendezvous with the Soviet space station to gather intelligence and maybe even disable it, before continuing on to the moon to collect rock samples and possibly disable the Russian rover. So basically, it's just a trip for vandalism. So we meet our protagonist, Kaz Zemeckis. At one time, Kaz had hopes of being an astronaut himself, but a mid-air collision between a seagull and his Phantom 4 fighter resulted in the loss of his left eye, along with any chance of following his space dreams. He's still employed at NASA, though, but as a crew liaison. He has a pivotal role as the main contact between the astronauts in Houston and the politicians and military bosses in Washington. He needs to keep the decision-makers in NASA in the loop with what Washington is planning without tipping his hand to a potential mole who is secretly working for Moscow. And what about that Soviet moon rover? What secrets did it discover? So the rest of the novel, it follows the astronauts as they prepare for their mission, the mission itself, and then the immediate aftermath. And needless to say, things do not go according to plan. I'm not going to go into all the details of the plot, but the unmanned space station is actually manned. There are deaths in space, there's a Soviet stowaway, and tons of intrigue. And I think I'll just leave it there as far as the synopsis.
So this is where Dennis always says, "Tell me how you found this book," and we make a joke about finding it at the library, and haha.
Exactly.
Then, okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. It's good to get that out of the way, because,
Yeah. So how did you find this book, Trevor?
I'll tell you what. My history with Chris Hadfield is that, of course, like every other Canadian who knew him, followed his exploits in space, proud of him as he led the International Space Station. So when I heard that he was writing a fiction novel about, and the topic was space, I thought, wow, what a great fit. Like this seems like a natural outcome. And, they always say writers should write what they know. And who better to write a novel about space than a former astronaut? So I was very excited to read this book. I had read his non-fiction book, which I think was called something like An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, which I greatly enjoyed. I thought it was very well written, lots of insights inside things about being an astronaut, but also just his philosophy of life, and I greatly admired that book. So when I came to this one, I suppose I had maybe unrealistically high expectations for this book, because well, let's just say it's been about a week to 10 days since I have read it. And I feel like my thoughts have mellowed a bit since I initially finished it. When I finished it, it felt like a gut punch, like kind of like a waste of time in a way. I just found so much of it was, what's the word?
Boring.
Yeah. It was so, I never thought that a book about space could be such a snooze fest. Mm-hmm. And there was so much of it that was, he spent so much time in there talking about the technical side of things that I almost felt like I was watching a movie with the director's commentary on. Mm-hmm. But the novel version of that, I felt like everything that would normally appear like in footnotes, he worked into the narrative of the novel, like unnecessarily, at the expense of developing characters. And I had read an interview with him where he said that he had kind of approached this book like he would have approached a NASA mission, in that he kind of plotted everything out, every beat of the book, kind of from beginning to end. He knew exactly where it was going, and then he went back and kind of added to it.
Added the user manuals for every
exactly,
single piece of machinery and equipment that we come across. Which
any type of sort of writing that I've done or I enjoy, there wasn't anything maybe organic about it. Mm-hmm. I felt like it was very much by the numbers.
Yeah.
But a lot of scenes about dudes working the problem with working problems and making all the right decisions. Mm-hmm. I remember reading a review of another book that referred to this type of genre as competence porn. and I feel like this kind of falls into that, where it's like, everyone makes logical decisions.
Yeah.
And I was like, of course you would say that, because that seems to be the right thing to say. So anyway, I did not love it. I feel like afterwards, I've been away from it for a bit now. I feel like I can talk maybe a little more fairly about it, but it was a pretty big disappointment for me.
Yes, I echo many of the things that you said. I really struggled with this book, especially the first 100 pages or so. I thought it was going to be a DNF. I thought I would never forgive you for making me read it. I was just hating my life because I had to read this book. I did find the plot picked up a bit more and I got more invested in it. But yeah, those technical things just bogged the whole thing down, really to the detriment of the plot. Like, there were several instances, I'm thinking of when the Russian space station opens fire on the Americans, and it's this very exciting moment that's about to happen, but he stops and then explains the weapon on the Soviet space station and the hydraulics and the chemistry and why it's there, and it just drags the whole thing down. And it's the same thing happened when they're on the moon and Svetlana's about to fire the gun at Chad. Again, it pauses and talks in great detail about this gun. Like, how did an editor not take that out?
I know, it really felt like Chris Hadfield was just trying to make the case, to prove himself. And I feel like if there's anyone in the world that doesn't have to prove that he knows about space, it's Chris Hadfield. It's like, yeah, we know. You don't have to tell us that you know. Like we know you know. Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. And there maybe is a small percentage of readers that love that type of thing. But I feel like those small percentage of readers would probably enjoy reading a nonfiction book more, in the sense of like, how would you deal with a dead body in space, right? I mean, there was so much time dedicated. Spoiler: one of the astronauts gets killed. His name is Luke, and he was a Skywalker. So I'm not sure if that was a connection at all.
I never noticed that.
Yeah, and it was. I started to feel a little bit like Weekend at Bernie's, in that Luke's corpse is stuffed away in a spacesuit, and it's just floating there.
Yeah.
In this tiny capsule, mm-hmm. And every once in a while it's like, oh, they're going to have a sleep, but oh no, they had to move Luke's body because it was floating there, or
like release the pressure
because his body was giving off gases. And I guess all that stuff probably would happen, and potentially, right, with a dead body in space.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a bit too much of it.
There was a lot of that.
Like, I mean, sure, it sucked to be him. Luke, but I felt like, okay, yeah. And then I kind of thought what they did with his body was kind of, I don't know what I was expecting. I thought they were going to bury it. Well, they took out a wheelbarrow out into like a big hole on the moon.
I mean, they only had limited time on the moon, right?
Yes.
And digging a hole would take a while. Yeah. And
for someone that spent so much time trying to write a realistic story of space, some of it just did not feel believable. Like, you can't tell me that an astronaut could hang on to the side of a spacecraft, like, with its burners on, heading to the moon.
Yes.
And then she's hanging on with one glove.
Yeah.
And then they're able to somehow open the hatch and bring her in. Like, I mean, I'm no astronaut. And even if that is technically possible, it didn't feel like I was like, this, I don't know. I feel like sometimes things have to be believable, even if they are technically possible. And I felt like that was getting beyond the realm. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I thought was weird is, okay, they're going to go and vandalize this space station. Mm-hmm. It all goes wrong. One of the Soviet astronauts gets killed. One of the Americans gets killed. They unknowingly take this other cosmonaut along with them. And then rather than just like abort the mission, which they did at Apollo 13 when they had, I think, something, a water pump went on the thing and they boarded the moon. They just like, you know what? Okay, one of our astronauts is dead. We killed a Russian. We've got a Russian stowaway, but you know what? We can just keep going to the moon. Let's just, the mission's on. I'm like, what? I don't know. But I guess, again, where it comes to the creative license, I guess it wouldn't be much of a novel if at that point they just, turned around or came back.
And they had already invested so much, and
there was one part of the novel I thought was well done. I thought, or felt realistic, was sort of the paranoia and the just of the Cold War, of sort of not knowing what the Soviets were doing, the Soviets not sure what the Americans were doing, but they were both kind of listening in to each other, and this whole once Savannah got on the ship, that's when I felt like that section of the novel, up until maybe they're on their way home, was my favorite part. I thought you had this really interesting potential of having this female Russian astronaut teamed up with
Chad.
And I have to say, his names are great because Chad, and I apologize to any of our listeners who are named Chad, but Chad is kind of a jerk name.
It really is. Yeah. I've never met a Chad I've liked.
No, I don't think I've ever, And so I thought, of course, it was kind of funny because early on you're not really sure who the mole is. And I'm like, I bet it's Chad.
My question though, okay, so what's the deal with Chad? Chad has this weird Russian background.
Yeah.
And he's getting money from the Russians, but he's not a Russian spy. He killed Tom just so he could go to the moon and be the hero, right? Like, he's not working for the Russians.
No, that's just one of those other parts of the novel that just didn't make sense because the Russians didn't even know. I don't think they knew that Chad was a part of it until after Tom was killed, right? Because did they may have known?
Well, it was hard to say because there was that brother who's the priest.
Yeah. That was weak.
That was weak. Yeah.
Like that brother, like they introduced him right at the beginning.
Yeah.
The guy that has one leg that's longer than the other.
See, I don't remember that at all.
I remember all the description. I thought every character was going to have a deformity of some sort. Like, Kaz missing an eye. The Russian priest, one leg longer than the other. And then it'll be like, here's the astronaut. He's missing an arm. But no, it didn't get that bad. But it was like, this Russian priest, he seems like on the up and up. And in fact, it was his translator, or who was that guy? The younger guy hanging around with him, who was somehow connected to the Russians.
Yeah.
And basically, they realized that this priest, is the biological older brother of Chad, who after World War II, there was a lot of confusion in Berlin, and Chad was adopted out to an American family and raised on a farm in Wisconsin.
Yes.
And yet somehow this brother, because you get a bit of that at the very beginning of the novel, he's kind of going through lists and trying to find, he somehow figures out where his brother, who I can only assume his name wasn't Chad. They say something like his name was Yuri or something, I think. Or at some point.
Ivan,
it could have been. And all the Americans were called Sam.
Yeah, John.
And right. And so we're led to believe that this kid, who's been adopted out from his culture, his family, into a Wisconsin farm when he's like, what, 7, 8, 9, 6?
I think about 9, maybe?
Under 10, at least.
Yeah.
He's able to maintain not even just a few Russian words, but he can converse and understand Russian fluently.
Yeah, and he wasn't, like, he was moved from Russia to Germany. Like, it seems like he's mostly been in Germany.
Right, so if anything, he would know German.
Yeah.
So somehow, like, has he been secretly taking, like Russian correspondence courses? Like, when he's on the farm, he's milking the cows?
Smart.
He's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
And he has a very low opinion of everyone else. Like,
yes.
Which again...
he's a sociopath.
He was a sociopath, and that was something that was very, like, there wasn't a lot of nuance in the characters.
No.
Like, Chad was a douche, right, from day one.
Yeah, big douche.
And, like, when he landed on the moon, he was all like, oh, look at all those losers back home, or whatever. Like, I mean, I feel like, really, I mean, do astronauts, I don't know, maybe I have astronauts on a pedestal. I guess there's some jerk astronauts.
They have to have, I guess, a healthy self-confidence.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, his was definitely overblown. And but the characters were generally very flat in this book. I mean, I feel like my favorite character was probably Svetlana, who I felt like had the most complexity to her. But I mean, Kaz, he's one-eyed, he's competent. Michael, he's black, he's competent. I mean, Chad has personality. He's a jerk.
Mm-hmm. Luke really didn't have make much of an impression until he became a corpse.
Yeah.
Do you think Tom was named for Major Tom?
Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started to think of every character maybe was named after someone. That's why I thought of Luke Skywalker, because he did do a spacewalk.
Yeah.
Michael, I hope, is named for Michael Collins, who was the guy that stayed in the thing around in the moon when Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong went down. I hope he's named for Michael Collins and not Michael Jackson, because he was the only black man in the story, which I thought, come on now.
Yeah.
But,
which I didn't realize until, I don't know, like 200 pages in, and I said page 129.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, was it obvious before?
No, not at all. It was only when Chad started being racist.
Right.
He's like, what do you think about that guy? He's like, what?
Are you
Michael.
Are you Jewish?
Yeah, exactly. He's along. He says, oh, is that a Jewish name? I'm like, that's a weird way to maybe start a conversation. Like, I wasn't even thinking at that point that Chad was awful. Yeah. I guess I said from day one. He was a douche from day one. He didn't immediately appear, except for his name. I thought, boy, this guy's saddled with a bad name.
Yeah.
But, yeah, when they're flying along, he just asks Kaz, is that a Jewish name? It's just like... And then that didn't really go anywhere. I guess I was just showing that he was just...
there was something to be wary of.
Right.
Yeah.
It made Kaz uncomfortable. And because Kaz's priority was the well-being of the crew. Mm-hmm. And with Tom's sudden death and Chad being put in, he kind of realized that could be a destabilizing factor. So he was kind of just feeling out Luke and Michael's of saying, has Chad kind of giving you the no feeling or whatever, and yeah.
I liked your point about competence porn, because I feel like in so many ways this book is the epitome of guy fiction. It's basically like Top Gun in book form. You have this one-eyed former fighter pilot who's recruited for a top secret mission where he gets to fly a plane, and he gets to be on a helicopter and be on a boat and fire a gun, and hangs out at a barbecue joint and meets a hot scientist who just so happens to, be able to hang with the guys and drink beer. And that just felt so cliche and overdone.
Yes, no, absolutely. And, I was thinking too, I know here saying that the novel had all the preposterousness of a Clive Cussler novel without any of the fun.
Oh.
I've read a few Clive Cussler. They are totally guy fiction. They're like stuff. It's ridiculous. None of it's supposed to really, really taken as being serious, but they're fun. They're They're modern swashbuckling novels. This one I felt like was trying for that, but it was so earnest in it, trying to be accurate and maybe faithful to what would have actually happened. It was just a bunch of guys just trying to respond to bad situations, which I get. Like, one of my favorite movies is Apollo 13, where everything goes wrong, and it's all about like the ingenuity of the flight crew and the ground crew to bring these astronauts home. It's great, and but it just didn't make for very enjoyable reading.
Can you guess the moment in this book that I cringed at?
Was it when Chad kept calling Sylvia Toots?
That was bad, but that's not what I'm thinking of.
No, okay, I
Do you remember a moment? It's after Tom dies, and Laura and Kaz go back to his place.
Oh, yeah.
And Kaz busts out his guitar and starts playing songs at her.
Right.
That was so... Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to text you at that moment.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's things like that I felt like has Chris Hadfield like actually had like experiences? I mean, obviously he's married to his children, but like that did not feel like...
That's not something you do.
That's uncool. It's uncool.
Have you seen the Barbie movie?
I have not.
Okay, there's a scene where the Ken discover patriarchy, and they bring it back to the Barbie world, and things go to shit. And there's a scene where all the Kens are serenading all the Barbies, and they're playing guitar and singing the Matchbox 20 song "Push" at them, and that's exactly what this was like.
Yeah.
Like, ugh.
Yeah, it's sort of like, okay, again, you know what? I don't feel badly taking shots at this novel because Chris Hadfield's going to be fine.
Oh, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like, if this was like a first author, a local author, as librarians, we like to encourage people to read. We like to support authors and stuff, and we try to give a balanced idea that this might not be for us, but it might be for somebody else. But I can't, in good conscience, recommend this book to very many people. At least people that I want to come away with having a positive reading experience.
Although my dad would like this book.
Okay.
But he is a pilot. Like, he's flown planes. So
oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. So there's definitely a niche.
There's a niche. There's a niche.
Yeah. And to be fair, first novel. And for a first novel, I mean, it is a first novel. You know, like he like checked that box.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he did it.
And he wrote a sequel.
Which, he seems like somebody that's always striving to be better. And maybe, would he listen to this podcast and take our comments to heart? Or is there sort of one of those things where, like, everyone is saying positive things? Like, I read one review where it talked about the issues with all the technical details. And then the line that I highlighted said, but this did not slow the novel down. I'm like, yes, it did.
Yeah.
Like, so, I don't know. One more thing about Kaz is that Chris Hadfield, he really doubled down on the glass eye.
He did.
Like, it wasn't just mentioned once. Like, throughout the novel, he kept talking about taking it out and, like, it was itchy, drying out. And I just couldn't imagine a movie version of this where, like, so much of it is him, like, fiddling with his glass eye. Like, I mean, if I was making a movie, I would maybe just give him a patch. Because a patch would make him a little more badass, make him look like Nick Fury.
Yeah.
But then they'd be like, oh, that guy's just a Nick Fury clone. So maybe you want to give him a glass eye.
The glass eye, I imagine, would be hard to... Like, would you include that first scene where he loses the eye?
Yeah.
Because it'd be a hard thing for a camera to show. Because, I mean, glass eyes look really good these days, you know?
Right. Oh, this is the 70s, though.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
It was just like a marble.
A wonky glass eye.
A wonky glass eye. I mean, between that and
Did they have glass eyes in the 70s?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there's probably like some, like, I'm sure, like, you know, there's some like Civil War veteran probably had a glass eye. I mean, it probably was just like a ball bearing or something.
What do you think is in those moon holes?
Yeah, I don't know.
I wonder if we find out in the sequel.
I kind of feel like the sequel steers away from space.
Oh, okay.
And kind of is more about Cold War and the Soviet-American relations. I think Kaz does appear again, so he's going to be the character, but I'm not sure how many characters from the first novel appear in the second one.
Well, all the main ones are, like, Chad is dead.
Yeah.
Tom is dead.
Luke is definitely dead.
Svetlana's gone back to Russia.
Yeah, I know. I did like that he did incorporate so many real-life people in. Like,
see, I don't know this world, so I didn't realize they were real people until I read your blog post, and then there's that thing at the end where it talks about the real-life people.
Yeah, like Gene Kranz, who was the, mission commander on the ground. He's the guy that's played by Ed Harris in Apollo 13, and Al Shepard was an astronaut.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, Nixon and Kissinger. There are all those characters towards the end. So I liked that kind of, you know, melding of historical figures with fictional. I thought that part worked.
Are any of these people still alive? Like, would he have had to get permission?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
The other thing that I just thought was kind of farcical was how the Soviets had to wait until Michael was on the far side of the moon to talk to Chad, and then when he came back, they had to hush up. I mean, I suppose that's how it would be, but it just seemed kind of like a comedy or whatever. Like, he's gone behind the moon. Now we can send our messages and click twice on the mic to tell us. And
there was a lot of communication between so many different places and people, and considering, I think Hadfield did a good job of making it clear who's talking to who and when and how. Even if I didn't totally understand the science, like how the Russians could talk to Chad without Houston or the Americans hearing.
Yeah, exactly. I imagine he put a lot of thought and research into how could this work.
But he didn't need to, He could have just made something up that sounded passable for people like you and I, and that would have been enough. Yeah. Like, I mean,
if Chris Hadfield came to me before it was published and said, I'd like you to read this and give me some honest feedback, I would lose about half of the technical stuff. Easy. And spend those pages on developing the characters a bit. Work on the dialogue. Try to make them sound more than just like Hardy Boy characters saying like "gee whiz" and "gosh darn" and things like that. And I'd say maybe spend a little bit more time with Chad and try to make his motivations a little more understandable. Like, is he just a psychopath?
He does live in that super weird house with the carpet on the walls.
He seems like he has a natural closeness to his mother.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, wasn't he wearing like a little necklace or something?
Oh, yeah.
And that was his last memory as he was drowning or something.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've already said whether I would recommend this book or not. But what about you, Toby? What would
I would not recommend it, except to my dad,
right?
Or to people who are extremely interested in space or flying, who have the technical knowledge where the explanations in this book will mean something to them and will maybe be interesting.
Yeah.
To me, it was just a lot of words. It was hard to get through, and I considered scanning it, but then sometimes I was like, oh, there's going to be something in here that I'll need to know. So, well, I think, is that all we have to say about this book?
I think so.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know if you're saying, is this how misogynists talk? Because I was just trying to think about this again. I'm just piling up on Chad.
He deserves it.
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't think Chris Hadfield is a bad guy. So he probably found it hard to write like a jerk.
Yeah.
But he also, I think he could probably write about, maybe astronauts really do say stuff like gee whiz.
You think so?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Maybe they did in the 70s.
Yeah, in the 70s they did.
Yeah. So are we ready to move on?
I think so.
All right. Then we'll move on to our next segment. Can you tell me a book I would also like? Would you like to go first, or should I go first?
Well, I'm very easy. I feel there's a chance that maybe we've picked the same book, and we never confer ahead of time. This time I almost texted you to say, I'm thinking of doing this.
Okay.
I didn't do it because I thought, well, sometimes we pick the same nerd word, weirdly enough.
Yes.
And I think occasionally we pick the same book. So I'd leave it up to you, our host, to decide whether you'd like me to go first, or if you'd like to go first.
Do it.
All right. I have picked The Martian by Andy Weir.
I picked another book by Andy Weir.
Okay, well, no problem. Okay. So like a good NASA mission, I built redundancy into my pick, so I had another backup pick. But what I'll just talk briefly about The Martian by Andy Weir. It was a novel that he originally wrote, could not get published. Kind of an interesting story. So he serialized it on his blog, and then it became very popular. He was encouraged to make a Kindle book version of it for 99 cents, which was the top-selling Kindle book. So it was eventually picked up in 2014 and published as a paper novel, and went on to get to the top of the New York Times bestseller list, and it was on the number one spot of 19 out of the 76 weeks that it was listed there. So that was kind of a real success story. And what is it about? Well, The Martian is, again, like the Apollo murders, not really alternate history, more like an alternate future, where there is a Martian exploration team, and the main character, Mark Watney, is left behind on Mars because there is a storm, and he's assumed dead, and the rest of his team evacuates, but he's not dead. He was just injured. So the rest of his team is on its way back to Earth, and he has to figure out how to survive on the surface of Mars with only the equipment that he has there. And so it's written as a series of like log entries, so it kind of has almost like a found footage, Blair Witch feel to it, but that's interspersed with narrative. And then just through his own ingenuity and luck, he is able to figure out how to make contact with Earth. And then again, it sort of becomes a rescue and recovery mission. How are we able to get astronauts back to Mars to rescue him, and can he survive the whole time? So I feel like it does a much better job of creating excitement and pacing and character development, and there still is a lot of technical detail in the book, but I feel like it's nicely balanced with an actual readable plot. And it was made into a film following year, 2015, by Ridley Scott, starring Matt Damon as the titular Martian. And interestingly enough, it was actually shown on the ISS to the astronauts there. And I was really, really hoping that it was shown when Chris Hadfield was up there, but it was after he had come back to Earth. So I thought that would have been a nice full circle. So that is my book recommendation, The Martian by Andy Weir.
What was your backup?
Well, my backup was any John le Carre novel. Okay. So what I was going to say is that if you like the espionage part of the Apollo murders, and then I would say if you want to particularly start with The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, because it's a shorter one, and it introduces you to the character George Smiley. Or if you wanted to jump in with both feet, he has something called the Carla Trilogy, which starts with Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. So how about you? What do you have?
So I have another book by Andy Weir, Project Hail Mary, which I think is better than The Martian. And you have heard me talk about this book before.
I have.
Yes, it is easily one of the most exciting books I've ever read. It is science fiction, of course. And I feel like it's what the Apollo murders wanted to be and could have been, but just wasn't. So it's about a man who wakes up in this weird circular room, and various tubes are attached to his body, and mechanical arms in the ceiling are attending to all of his needs. And as his brain fog clears, he remembers that he is a science teacher named Ryland Grace, and he is on a spaceship that is hurtling towards another galaxy in a quest to save the world. So what has happened is that back on Earth, it's been discovered that there's some sort of organism that is eating light, and it's going to quickly lead to another ice age, which is going to lead to the extinction of everyone and everything. And some other star in another galaxy has been unaffected by this organism. So Ryland Grace is heading there to see what's up and to relay that information back to Earth. And it's kind of a suicide mission because he won't have time to get back to Earth. This galaxy is so far away that this journey in space is years long. So he's never going to be able to get back. So that's the basic premise. I don't want to give too much plot away because I think that's part of the enjoyment of this book, but I will say for a little teaser that there is a lovely friendship that is formed. I won't say with who or what, but like Hadfield, I think Weir is clearly a science nerd who is excited about what he's writing about. And also, like Hadfield, he does get technical, but not nearly to the same extent. And what I think he does really successfully is that he'll get technical for a paragraph or two and then explain in layman's terms what exactly that means. So you don't even really need to pay attention or worry about understanding it because he will lay out exactly what he's talking about. So yeah, just a very exciting book. I carried it around when I was reading it because I just wanted to read a few more pages whenever I had a spare moment. And I understand that a movie will be coming soon with Ryan Gosling. And I approve of that casting.
Sure. He was Neil Armstrong in,
really?
it was called First Man.
Oh, okay.
And he played Neil Armstrong. So I could see he's
also Ken.
Also, yes. Multi-talented.
Yeah, so that is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir.
That's awesome. I remember you mentioned it after the last time you had mentioned that. I put it on my to-be read list. Still have not read it, but now I feel like I need to bump it up a few titles after being mentioned again.
Yeah, so. It's a good one. All right, so now it is time for our next segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, and I don't have Dennis's script for this, but this is where we talk about words that have delighted us. So would you like to go first?
I'd be happy to go first.
Okay.
My word is Tang.
Oh.
Now, Tang, there's many different meanings of the word. Did you know it was a type of fish?
I did not.
Dory from Finding Nemo was a blue tang.
Oh.
And an American submarine, the USS Tang, I'm assuming it was named after the fish, not the drink crystals. It was a World War II era submarine that had the dubious distinction of being blown up by one of its own torpedoes. Yeah, it's very sad. It went out and the torpedo kind of took a funny turn and it came back.
Oh dear.
But I'm talking about Tang the drink. Yeah. Now, I'm mentioning this because our book is about space, and Tang is often associated with spaceflight because it went up with John Glenn in his orbit of the Earth in 1962. But contrary to popular belief, it wasn't actually developed by NASA for spaceflight. It was actually invented by William Mitchell, who was a chemist working for a company called General Foods, which has recently now been bought by Kraft, in 1957. So it was around before NASA found it. He also developed a type of tapioca substitute in World War II that the GIs called Mitchell Mud. So, as if the horrors of war weren't enough, the soldiers were forced to eat tapioca. So, he cornered the market on what he called convenience food, in that he went on to invent Cool Whip and Jell-O.
Ooh.
And the exploding candy Pop Rocks.
Oh, wow.
Right, which I guess if there's pressurized CO2 molecules in there that cause a fizzy reaction when they're dissolved. Mm-hmm. And there's other names for it, space rocks, space dust. Sounds like I'm describing street drugs. Did you know there's an urban legend about taking Pop Rocks and carbonated drinks, and it will cause your stomach to explode?
I did. I was scared of that as a child.
Apparently, in the 1970s, there was a moral panic, so much so that it was taken off the market, and they had to make a statement say it's safe, everybody. I mean. So there's Tang. I don't know what else to say about it. Crystals, you put water in, you drink it, I guess. Interestingly, there's also a drink called Ting. Oh. Which is not Tang, although it sounds similar. It's a carbonated beverage that's popular in the Caribbean. It's kind of like that Orange Gina.
Oh, I love Orange Gina.
Okay, well, apparently Ting is available in Canada. Oh. I've never seen it, never looked for it. So whether you're into Tang or Ting, there's a drink for you.
Oh, all right. Now I'm thirsty. My nerd word is in a totally different direction. It is wilco, which I have previously known as the American alternative rock bands led by Jeff Tweedy. But it is a word that appears in this book and does not refer to the band, as this book is set in the 70s. It refers to what's called a procedure word that is short for will comply. So wilco, will comply. So procedure words are words or phrases limited to radio telephone procedure used to facilitate communication by conveying information in a condensed standard verbal format. So we do get lots of procedure words in this novel in the communications between the ground crew and the crew in space. Words like over, out, do you read, Roger, which actually originates from the practice of telegraphers sending an R to stand for received after successfully getting a message. And of course the word wilco, which means I understand and will comply. Most of these words are pretty straightforward, but I did find this tidbit interesting. Copy and Roger are actually different. They both mean I got it, but in a slightly different way. Copy indicates to the sender that the information for the receiver has been received satisfactorily. Roger acknowledges receipt and conveys that the receiver intends to take action based on the information conveyed. Oh. So slightly different,
Yeah.
Some subtleties in procedure words. So yeah, wilco, will comply. And for those curious, my favorite wilco album is Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, the album title referring to the letters Y, H, and F in the NATO phonetic alphabet, which is another method of communication.
Wow, do you think they were sending messages to space?
Wilco?
Yeah.
With Yankee Hotel
I'm
Foxtrot,
wondering.
or just in general?
Well, in general, to whoever's ready to receive it.
Maybe.
Maybe if you play their songs backwards.
I'll have to try that. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have this month. Thank you so much for joining us, dear readers. For our next episode, we're going to read and discuss The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. A groundbreaking work of science fiction, The Left Hand of Darkness tells the story of a lone human emissary to Winter, an alien world whose inhabitants spend most of their time without a gender. His goal is to facilitate Winter's inclusion in a growing intergalactic civilization, but to do so he must bridge the gulf between his own views and those of the completely dissimilar culture that he encounters. Embracing the aspects of psychology, society, and human emotion on an alien world, The Left Hand of Darkness stands as a landmark achievement in the annals of an intellectual science fiction. Have comments or book suggestions for us? Send us an email. You can find all our contact info at the bottom of the page at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. You can also find all our past episodes there too. If you haven't already, subscribe to Time to Read on your favorite podcasting service and maybe leave us a review. Tell your book-loving friends about us too. And until next time, make sure you find
Time to read.
All I need is time to read. All I need is time to read. All I need is time to read. All I ever really need is a little more time to read.
Do I need to read the...
I don't think
available?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to. I don't think I have the. I'll be lucky if I get an episode out. I mean, you could read it, but I don't think. I know. I don't think. Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, very good. I'm gonna. Any final words for the recorder?
Final words for the recorder. I don't think so.
No, I don't think. Okay, I'm gonna turn it off now.
Okay.